Welcome to Thrivecast, a community podcast series where we are meeting and talking to the practitioners in the growth and engineering field. Today, we are talking to Anuj. In today's episode, we'll talk about what is growth, how is growth teams built, what's their purpose, what's their KPIs, if you will, and we'll touch the major part of the episode on how to build growth teams. Anuj, welcome to the Thrivecast podcast. Always love talking to you. You've had a very beautiful career. You've experimented with many things in the field of growth. For the listeners who have not had the background of listening to maybe the Andrew Kaplan's "How I Got There" kind of a podcast, could you briefly describe, your how did you get into growth, what things that you experimented, and the whole hog around it?
Sure. So thanks for having me. I'm glad we finally get to record one of these because we always have great conversations. Uh, and I think, like almost every other growth person, I'm an accidental growth practitioner because my degrees are in chemistry and biochemistry. And I think you'll find that's true of a lot of people in this field. I know you'll be talking to Hila. She has a biology major. Sean Ellis comes from a liberal arts background. It's just all over the place, and I'm just one amongst many who stumbled onto this career where we discovered that all of this growth stuff is nothing but applying the scientific method to product and marketing. So for everybody watching or listening, if you have ever run an experiment in a lab in school and watched the colors change on that chemical as you poured another one into it, congratulations, you know how to do growth. You and I are the same because that's all we are doing day in and day out. Instead of chemicals, we're doing pixels. And I think that is the central thesis. I think that anybody finds themselves in this field with is that they can't resist trying new things out, right? So I think if you go look at the LinkedIn profiles of anybody, you'll find they've done a bunch of things. They'll land up advising, they'll land up writing, they'll land up podcasting, they'll have side hustles, and that's just because you are now hooked onto this. How will I know, right? Which is the central idea behind growth, right? You can't prejudge anything, and you have to just try new things out, and some things will work, and most things will not. But there's only one way to find out, right? And so that is how I found myself in this growth, is just sometimes accidentally stumbling onto things and saying, oh, this looks interesting, and I'll try that out. And some being more opportunistic about things, like writing a book, which, hey, why has nobody written growth hacking for dummies? Maybe I'll write it. It's the sort of thing. Right, so it's a combination of serendipity and being in that mindset all the time of trying new things out, which then helps you stumble onto opportunities maybe other people don't see.
What a beautiful way to put it. I think you mentioned about experimenting, chemical experiments. People conduct experiments on other things, on other people, and here you're conducting experiments on yourself, on your career, by trying various things. That's a great opportunity to learn. Maybe we'll maybe start from there, right? Could you describe a little? I know in your storied career across the board, you worked in various areas. Written a book on growth. You have been a Techstars mentor, especially on growth. You've talked to lots and lots of leaders in the space. What have you found? Maybe if you could describe a little background about why did the growth teams come into play? How did they come into play? What's the history behind it?
Yeah, so I think this started out maybe in like maybe the late 90s or early 2000s, when I don't think these were even called growth teams. And I recall a conversation, um, which I think Sean Ellis started somewhere, that found that maybe the first proto growth team really was at eBay
Oh,
in the
really?
late
Okay.
late 90s and early 2000s. And these teams may have existed, right, where these people were just tasked with trying new things out, but they weren't called growth teams. They may not even have been as cross functional as we read about nowadays, but it was just somebody or somebodies that were tasked with finding new opportunities. And if you really think about this, the the startups that succeed, right, the ones that get beyond product market fit, right, are the ones that are really growth teams in their own right. Because when you're pre-product market fit, your entire job is to iterate your way to find what works, right? So everybody is part of this growth team. I guess you're more of a validation team at that point, but the principles are exactly the same. It's just iterative, testing of things. And I think once you get post product market fit, which is when you really want to start focusing on growth, right, is when these teams start to coalesce a little bit more. So, but even then, sometimes it just starts out with somebody whose job it is, is this given by the CEO, and sometimes it's the CEO themselves at an early stage startup is, okay, I'm just going to lead the charge with, finding new paths and, blazing new trails, and I will slowly bring people into the fold. So they're not as formal as you might think, right? I think the first time I started reading about something, more formal was, maybe in the days of Facebook, right, or very early days of LinkedIn, or very early days of Twitter. Like that's when I think it started becoming a thing, where you had a more dedicated team that had slightly more dedicated resources. May not have had all the resources, still had to do begging, which is the life of anybody in growth, is to just bribe your teammates with beer and pizza, and get some engineering time and some design time and some analysis time. um, right, so I think that's when that all started out, is with the success that all of these now big name startups started to find, with these dedicated teams, whose sole job it was to find new avenues for growth, right, was when it started percolating, I think, more in the consciousness that maybe this is a more dedicated role, and maybe this is a more dedicated team. It's because it's not possible for one person, forget doing everything, it's not possible for one person to know everything, it's not one possible for one person to be the best at everything. And even if you are, you can't be the best at anything for any amount of time, because this is one of those fields where if you don't keep up, you're obsolete tomorrow, sort of thing. Right, so I think the genesis and even the evolution as we see it in startups today is more, it's almost like, this primordial soup, where somebody takes on a role, and then they find opportunities, and then as that, the benefit of that role gets proven out, right, that's when more resources get given to that role, whether it's more teams, or whether it's a dedicated engineer, or a dedicated uh, analytics person, whatever that case may be. And I think that's how it generally progresses. The things you might read about with, oh, here's Facebook's growth team and here's Uber's growth team. Like, firstly, most startups don't even make it to that scale, to have these giant dedicated
Mhm.
growth teams with so much data to play around with. So I think for most of us, I think we are playing around with much smaller data sets, with much smaller teams, with far fewer resources, right? And just making do with what we have, but playing the role of that almost like interstitial glue, trying to bring all parts of the organization together towards this common goal of, what we call growth, but really translates tactically to, growing the value we deliver to customers.
So I think maybe translated, if I understand you correctly, I'm trying to imagine a startup going through a journey, right? They go through a journey of they are into pre-product, they're in the pre-product phase. They get into like a product market fit, trying to find ways whether they have value, they are creating value for the customers at all or not. Looks like what you're telling is that at that stage they're already experimenting. It's just that there's no growth, there's no central dedicated growth team, but it's probably the founders talking to customers and trying to find ways on, their solution fit, their product fit, their market fit, and so on and so forth. But looks like after they have reached some kind of a repeatable success, that's where is that right to say that that's where they start thinking of maybe the founders abdicating that role themselves and have dedicated growth teams to go figure out ways to continue this experimentation culture, and have that responsibility kind of bided away to a smaller team. Would that be a right translation on how the how the journey happens, or are there other different ways about it?
Yeah, no, that's generally right, right? Because ultimately, growth is about doubling down on what works, right? And I think, as you know as well, right, the biggest part of a CEO's job is really unblocking the team and giving them the resources to go do what they want to do, right? So at some point, they have to stop being the face of growth, and the person leading it, and let somebody, with a more dedicated skill set, and so maybe somebody with more experience take this on, because you don't want to be falling into the same traps and making the same mistakes that have already been made, right? You'd rather get
Yeah.
somebody on board who knows what they're doing so that they can hit the ground running, and go with it. And I just want to go back to what you said with that pre-product market fit and post-product market fit dynamic. You can almost think of like pre-product market fit is all about finding that niche where you are a must-have, right? So it's about narrowing sort of the focus and the funnel, right? You can almost think as everything becomes narrower and narrower, but as soon as you find it, you explode that bit out and go wider and find as many of those as you can, right? So the process is the same of experimenting your way to the one thing, pre-product market fit, and then it's the same process, but applied to blowing that out as much as possible after the fact.
So let me ask you maybe slightly differently. I love the analogy of the funnel. If you will. Um, Let me ask this. In the good old days, the traditional days where sales and marketing were primarily at the helm of acquiring users and getting more and more awareness into the product, into the company, is growth teams now slowly starting to take on that role of figuring out how to get more customers to to see the value of the product. So do you still see that is growth team replacing marketing over a period of time, or they just adding on? Maybe marketing takes on the role of an acquisition play, and growth teams take on the role of after they have acquired, bring them value. How do you see the growth of how do you see the differences between growth and marketing? Do they go side by side, or over time growth is going to replace marketing, especially if PLG becomes a primary way to stay around?
Right. So I think that is the key, right? Is it depends based on sort of what primary growth lever you even rely on, right? And again, there's no right or wrong way. It's whatever works for you. And I have, you know, this has been a struggle for me internally, because I have personally always, uh, because I'm somebody who practices this discipline, you know, place the importance of somebody, doing growth at a far higher level than I think it really is, and far higher than I think people are willing to admit, right? Because, and I experienced this firsthand at a company, right, where you have a sales and marketing machine that is just working, right? It is pure hubris to think that you will come in and say, no, no, forget all of that. I'm going to show you this fancy growth stuff, uh, right? And we'll explode everything out. It's like, yeah, I got slapped down really hard, uh, right? So like, we can't stop this machine, right? We have to make money. We have revenue goals, all of that, right? And so, and I think that tends to be the case, I think, for more companies than I think we think is the case. So if you have this case where it is going to be this sort of traditional sales marketing motion, right, and that's fine, I think the role of growth, I think, tends to be more bolt on, where it's like, you do what you're doing, I'm going to help you find newer avenues and newer opportunities for you to play and make your pool bigger. Which is not to say that now the growth team, or is now this subordinate team. It is just a different role, right? Because ultimately it doesn't matter whether you are like a product led company or a not product led company. Ultimately, if you are on a growth team and growth is in your title, unfortunately for you, your job is to actually grow, which means not just doing more tests and getting more wins. It means actually impacting the bottom line of the business, right? So no matter where you sit, it's a super stressful role, because you have to rapidly learn about how do you make business impact, right? So, and I think that's something that maybe gets forgotten in all of this. Oh, there's growth process and experimentation. All of that is damn good, Right? But ultimately, the CEO doesn't care about anything but, okay, what did this do for my bottom line? Like, am I
Yeah.
going to hit,
Where's the mullah? Show me the mullah.
am I going to hit that 1 million ARR so I can have a good Series A? Like, that is all they care about. Like, you can
Yeah.
talk about all your fancy tools and everything else. It doesn't matter. Right. So, and I think that's the one foundational thing that gets forgotten, I think, by a lot of people who get so excited by this growth stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So maybe I think it could be nice to have some maybe either yourself or someone you're a prolific writer yourself, someone like you to be able to go lay out the land of, hey, if you're in the early stage, this is what maybe why don't we touch upon that subject. Let's say if you're an early stage company, you've reached your product market fit, and you start your first hire, in the growth space, for some reason, for whatever reasons, the leadership decides that growth needs to be now a dedicated person. Whatever the signals that they received, internally, externally, somehow they decided that they should be now a dedicated team for growth. Where would you start with, maybe a very simpler KPI for them to go,
Sure.
go serve? Is that, I'm just thinking in terms of, is acquisition their first KPI? Is activation, the primary KPI? If marketing is doing the acquisition,
Sure.
awareness and the acquisition, is growth responsible for activation? Are they responsible for more engagement? Are they responsible for more monetization? How does one think about, as they go through this journey, of, hey, now I have a very small 1%, or 1.5%, or even a 0.5% growth
Yeah, yeah.
team? What's the KPI that they can hand it over to them?
Right. So there is not one, unfortunately, even though we like to think there is one. Right. The reason I say we like to think there is one is because, and I talk about this a lot myself, right? Is ultimately I like to have everything roll up to a North Star metric, right? Because ultimately that is that number in theory that quantifies value delivered. But that number has many dependencies, right? And so there is never going to be a scenario where all you do is look at a North Star metric and say, okay, if that's moving up, great. But certainly that is one that is a non-negotiable for everybody on the team, because whether you're sales, marketing, product, engineering, uh, customer success, I don't care. If what you are doing every day is either, we cannot draw the line to how that helps grow customer value, you're working on the wrong thing, right? So everybody has to have that in mind. You can, like, marketing can have its, you can have your MQLs, and product can have its PQLs, and sales can have its deals won, and engineering can have its tickets closed and bug squashed, and you know customer success will have its tickets closed. All of that is fine, right? But if you are not working on the things that are helping, you know move the needle on value delivered, because there are some things you can do that are more impactful than others, right? This is why companies die. It's like you focus on the least impactful things, right? And everybody is doing their own thing and guided by their own fiefdom, right? So I think that just at an overall level, I think that is a super important unifying number across the board and should be a non-negotiable. Now, after that, right? Uh, if all things being equal, post product market fit, right, the biggest bang for the buck, I think, comes from activation and focusing there. Like, now, why is that? Right? Because when you have reached product market fit, all you have proven is that you have value for a certain segment of user. You have not proven that you have discovered the best way to deliver value for that user. Right? And without that learning, if you go get more users, you are throwing most of that money down the drain, because you do not have a validated great first experience for these users. And you will then, by definition, have no way to predict how long these users will stay. And that is the real trick, right? What will get users to stay? Which by definition means the light bulb has to go off and they have to say, oh my God, like, where has this been all my life? Which is not to say that every product's activation rate will be 10 seconds or 1 minute. It is whatever it is, right? But a first experience is a first experience, and given our attention spans today, if there's no great first experience, there's no second experience, the game is over, right? And so, all things being equal, I think activation is the place to focus on, because if you can understand that if I put a certain kind of person through a certain kind of experience, that I expect them to behave in this sort of way and retain in this sort of way, then I can start to build out a bit of a model, mathematical model that says, okay, if I 100x this, the amount of the right kind of people, what can I expect for how many users will come through this, how many will
Hmm.
retain, how many will pay, right? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, and this is true for all VC backed businesses, and this has become sort of the question that I have begun to key in on, right? Is to ask all these early stage founders is how confident are you that you're going to hit your metrics for your Series A, right? And you know, I get a lot of justifying of, I think, I hope, uh, right? But
Yeah.
really, it is, them expressing in many many words that they haven't validated this experience, and they have not built a quantitative model that shows how, people will behave, across every step of this journey, right? So I think these three things to me go hand in hand. Is you have to have a well defined north star metric, right? Which again is, if you've picked correctly, it is the leading indicator of revenue. You have to figure out, what good activation looks like and what that activation metric is, right? And all of that has to be put through the lens of a quantitative growth model, right? And these three things have to work in tandem, because then as you do week over week experimentation and look at, how you're tracking, right? And you can build a model that says, I have 12 months to reach a 1 million ARR goal. What does that mean for, if you're a PLG business, how many free trials I need, or how many freemium users do I need coming through the experience every month, right? If I have a 2% conversion rate on that right now, what does that mean for my top of funnel,
Yeah.
right? And you do the back math to say, okay, if 1,000 users translate to a 1 million ARR, and look at the conversion rates, laddering up, that helps you build out a bit of a model that then says, okay, here's what I need for people actually coming through the door. Here's what I need for people signing up. Here's how many people have to engage ex, in the first experience. How many people have to product qualify or marketing qualify or whatever qualify, right? Or how many people have to demo, and then how many people have to actually sign up, right? But I think most people have not done that exercise,
Yeah.
right? And so then you reach month 10 and say, oh crap, I'm not going to make that goal. I'm not going to get my funding. I'm going to die, right?
Yeah.
And
So I think
this is math.
you
This is not any rocket science. This is basic math.
yeah, which is why I think a lot of people are approaching you to be their mentors, because you're asking these hard questions where they have to now compute. Otherwise, in in the good old days where money was much more freely given, the founders will probably say, "Hey, these are forward-looking statements, and anything that I can't predict the future, so I'm not going to go attempt
Right,
to answer whether I'll get the right metrics or not. But I can tell you what has happened in the past."
right.
Maybe that's why people are coming to you for for validating these things. So I think let me summarize what you just said, right? I think there are a couple of salient points, and we can probably put that as part of the show notes. What you said, and very likely if I trivialize it, maybe apologies if I'm trivializing, at a product market fit stage, they may or may not even have a North Star metric. So what you're saying is go discover that North Star metric, and there could be so many other metrics. From that, you find out one or two or three that you want to kind of watch, monitor, and see what makes sense. I think beyond that, what you said is go experiment on how you can improve those things, be it qualitative, quantitative. Figure out uh, how many experiments you can conduct, but more importantly, how can you move the needle on the North Star metrics at that time. That's a lot to take in from a growth team standpoint. So maybe if you could paint the picture of, if you want to hire the first hire on the growth as a growth team leader, what skills do you see, or should you see in that particular person, that that if you were to be the founder, and you're trying to hire a growth leader, what skills would you look into that particular person? Doesn't matter whether they sit with you in the labs, figuring out, should they have done growth before, is that what you look for?
Yeah. So I think there is two lenses to look at this through. One is a skill lens, and one is a behavioral lens. And most people index on the skill lens, but and also there I don't think there's a level of rigor there, uh, and I actually personally experienced this ironically, at a company that sold these, um, right. And so I spent a year at this e-commerce company that sold these mugs, right, never having worked at e-commerce, but I'm like, why not, let's try it. And at heart I'm a retention guy, right? And I'm not as great at running Facebook ads or Google ads or anything like that, right? And but for a lot of e-commerce companies, a lot of your growth that actually comes from how well you acquire and convert that traffic over, right? So there's a lot more testing in channel, right? Which is something I was not great at, right? And clearly, this is not a software product, so I can't test activation and retention or anything like
Hmm.
this, on this, correct? Uh, right. So a lot of my work became so certainly pure conversion rate optimization work on the website, right? And having to work with somebody who lived and breathed those channels, right? And so while was I able to make an impact? Absolutely. In retrospect, was I the right person to have hired? Absolutely not, right? Because I did not live and breathe, right, all of these channels, right? So I was dependent on somebody else to tell me what was right, what was wrong, right? And basically I just became this conduit for knowledge, right? And so I think the lesson from that experience was that if you're going to hire a head of growth, right, and I think this is more for the person who wants to be hired, incumbent on them to ask this question, right, is tell me what you see as your next year, 2 years, like what levers do you foresee yourself leaning on for growth? Is it going to be product? Is it going to be outbound sales? Is it going to be a lot of marketing? Is if it is, like, is it going to be a lot of TikTok content? Is it going to be ads? What is it going to be, right? Because there has to be a fit between that growth lever and what this person who you're trying to hire is good at, not only good at, best at, right? Because that is the only way this person can become a true force multiplier for you, is if they are an expert in the thing you need to grow. You just can't go and hire a growth person, right?
You've introduced a new term, Anuj, now. You may not have realized it. You've introduced the term growth leader fit. So, and it's incumbent on the leader himself, who's now looking for a new job, new gig. He's asking the questions to go find out, whether he's a fit for the company or not.
Totally.
Right. I think that's beautifully put. The unfortunate part is, most incumbents, or most guys who are trying to go find a new job, they're not in a position to ask these questions. They may not yet understand the business, so they have to spend that time. They have to spend that time to discover what this business is, what are the primary levers for that, and very likely even the founders at that stage may not exactly know, because that's what they are trying to get the growth leader for. Hey, go discover me. What are the prime metrics? What should I do? Right? This isn't the business that I am. Unfortunately, there's no mind map saying that, hey, for e-commerce, this is how you should look for growth. For medical or healthcare, this is how you should look at growth. I think that's a discovery process, and you rightly said it's upon the growth leader who's trying to get this new gig. Let me ask next question, and we'll run out of time very quickly. Let's assume that now you have a good growth leader.
Yeah.
How do you start building a culture, a new culture? Because before the growth leader joined in that particular team, it was mostly founder led. Founders
Yep.
were were driving these things, and they may not have a playbook per se. They would have gone by their own gut feel. But now you're getting a growth guy, right, who has to write this particular playbook. It's now he's starting a machine around growth. So essentially, he needs to write, he needs to document, he needs to go say that, hey, this is how we go do things here. How how does he go by, or he or she goes by,
Sure.
and what are the things that, um, what are the good indicators that, if you are the founder, to understand whether that person is building the right culture or not?
Yeah. Uh, so the answer to that question is actually the latter half of the answer to the previous question, right? So where I told you, like, people index on the skill part. The other very important part is the behavioral part, uh,
Hmm.
right? And what I mean by that is, by definition, what a growth team is supposed to be doing is breaking rules. So what you really need to hire is a rule breaker. You can't just go by somebody saying, oh, I'm a process person, I do tests, I follow this process. Yes, all of that is right, but what you primarily want is somebody that says, you know what, I don't care what exists, here's what I'm going for, I will freaking figure it out, right? So what you need are rule breakers who are goal oriented and move very fast, right? And are not really bothered about, for lack of a better way of putting it, collateral damage along the way. Right? And I think this is the one thing that almost no team susses out for. Because it's
Hmm.
very easy to see a certificate and to say, okay, I worked at Uber and I worked here. But are you the right kind of person for this team? Especially for an early team where we are running out of money, right? We are running out of time. We need to move fast, uh, right? And I need you to be very focused on this goal, right? So there's that aspect that doesn't get sussed out. The second aspect of growth, which you know I think is more common, right, is it's meant to be this multidisciplinary role, right, which means you have to bring everybody along for the ride, which means then you are also meant to be this sort of persuader of the team. You're like an internal influencer. Right? So you can't have somebody who's going to sit quietly, give the company a Google Doc to read and a presentation to read and think they will get it. Right? You need somebody who's going to be in everybody's faces, like just getting them excited about the opportunity ahead. Like just imagine what will happen, like when we crack this and we crack that, right? And getting them not only excited about that, but also then taking the time to educate everybody. And this is the most underrated part of the role, and I think this is what even I forget this on a regular basis, is that growth is not everybody else's job, right? They have their own day jobs they're being paid for. So you have to constantly, till you are blue in the face, and then after you're blue, you're purple in the face, and every other color in the face, constantly be repeating this message of why is this growth thing important and what role do you play in it. Because the second anybody thinks that, hey, growth is this thing Anuj does on the side there, it's all over, I should fire myself, right? Everybody should think, okay, here's how I play my role, right, in growth. So they have to be this evangelist, across the organization, whether it is lunch and learns, whether it is documentation, whether it is sharing results, weekly, or what's happening, good, bad, ugly, whatever it is, right? Getting everybody saying, oh, here's why all of these things matter, right? But then also taking advantage of the unifying power of that North Star metric, right? Or some sort of focus area metric, right? And this is something I have now started to lean on with teams, is everybody loves to do stand-ups, right? But I think they're mostly inefficient, because there's a lot of word salad and there's a lot of I did this and I'm thinking about this and I'm going to talk about this. It's all useless. So I now prefer to do them asynchronously using a Slack bot, right? And I have 4 questions in there, right? The first question is, you know what are you working on today that's going to move the needle on a North Star metric? Second question is, of everything you could be doing, what's the most impactful thing you could be doing to move the needle on a North Star metric? Right? Third question is, do you need help from anybody to be able to do this most impactful thing? Please mention them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And fourth, which is, the last two are optional. And the fourth is, did you learn anything yesterday that's making what you do today different?
Oh, those are beautiful, four beautiful questions. Yeah.
Right? Because now it's all in black and white. People have to think about this. There's nowhere to hide. Everybody can read it, right? And very easy to go and say, okay, why are you working on that thing? Why do you think this is the most impactful thing? It also lets other people say, oh,
Yeah.
I'm also working on that, maybe we're duplicating effort, uh, right? Or it lets another person know, I might need your help, like keep some time aside for me. But I think with the last question, is a lot of people, we learn a lot of small things in the way we do things, but we don't share it. But those are the things that I think tend to add up over time, is to and they become part of the culture of the team, is to, this is how we now do X. It's not just one person in the corner because he decided it was good, right? So I
So
think it's
yeah.
these sorts of things that start to spread culture. When you're talking about culture, it has to be very intentionally built out and engineered, right? And these are the sort of things that I think help.
I think you're making a very crucial point. By the way, those four questions are extremely difficult for feature teams, right? Feature teams won't understand that, which is why feature teams are going into their own sprint and they're focusing on, hey, these are the stories I want to go, finish and things like that. Maybe that's the point that you're making, that there's a person in the team who's asking these questions about growth constantly, right? And trying to measure yourself constantly, trying to rile up the team constantly, trying to help them. But it's very unlikely that everyone is able to think in the way that this particular person thinks, or the person or the team that thinks. Maybe what you're saying is the grow team's responsibility is to ensure that they are doing the thinking part of it, but at least and bring the entire organization together, be it sales, marketing, product management, customer success, together to actually understand what's what has conspired, and how should you go ahead and change their ways on figuring out that north star metrics, or in getting to that particular place. So there, it's very likely the other teams are implementing on the lines that the growth team is thinking about. Would that be right to say there's a thinker aspect, there's an implementer aspect?
Sure, I think it's clearly both, right? But I think this is the cliche of everybody rowing in the same direction. Like if you watched any boating race, the team that wins, right, is the team that is completely in sync, and everybody's oar goes in at the same time, and everybody's oar is at not only the same time but pointing the boat in only one direction. The team that comes in second, right, was the one who's maybe one oar came in a little bit late, right, or pointed the boat in a slightly different direction. We're all generally going in the same direction, which is what most teams tend to be like. We're generally,
Yeah.
but that's not how you win. You win by laser focusing and think that is all that matters. You can write all the user stories you want. Tell me why you're writing these stories. How is this helping move a North Star metric? If it is, great, keep working on it, right? But you can't just say I know my job is to release features. Like, no, your job is to release features that grow value delivered,
Yeah.
right? It's like it's same thing with an engineer, right? My job is to fix bugs. Great. Your job is not to just fix every bug. It's to fix the bugs that are most in the way of value delivered. I
Yeah.
don't care about the other bugs.
Yeah, I think maybe it looks like in Boston the boat racing season has started, and you're watching a boat season, and there's usually a guy in the front, who's like using either sticks or the
Exactly.
things to have the beats coming through. But Anuj, we are almost out of time, so we'll ask you one last question. You know. There's a lot of things that you mentioned today, and we'll probably summarize in the show notes. How does someone reach out to you? How does someone reach out to you for? Are you available to answer these questions? Are you you know could you give us some contact details so that we can publish it in the notes?
Sure, yeah. And again, always happy to nerd out about all of this stuff. It's all very exciting. So very active on LinkedIn, very active on Twitter. Both are at Anuj Adhiya. If there's any others, they're not worth it. It's only me. Yeah. All right. So anywhere,
Great.
uh, by all means.
We'll post your LinkedIn URL below. Again, thank you, Anush, for your valuable time. Always a pleasure to talk to you. To all the listeners, if you've joined today's discussion, you find it insightful, or not, please leave us a comment or some feedback. Stay tuned for more insights, more updates, and very soon we'll start having some more demos. Until then, keep thriving. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks.